Hello friends, in the series which we are doing on understanding popular culture, today we'll talk about theater. In one of the earlier lectures, we talked about theater and the way the theater has evolved in India, beginning from the Sanskrit drama or Sanskrit theater, and how Natya Shastra of Bharat Muni has played an important role in terms of the Indian drama or theater traditions. We also talked about some of the popular or folk theater forms, and how the folk theater forms, they have also been very important in the context of India, because they have a lot of diversity, and how the various diversified kinds of traditions in the theater forms, they have been reflected in the folk theater. And we also talked about that how the folk traditions or the folk theater form is easier to understand for the masses, because it is in the vernacular language or in the local language, and the various kinds of symbols which are in a way associated with the various kinds of that particular society, they are also being very easily understood by the audience as well, because they are able to relate with those cultural traditions. In the context of the readings, one can refer to Adirangacharya, the Indian theatre; Hemendranath Das Gupta, the Indian theatre; M.L. Varadapande and Dr. Sunil Subedar edited the critique of Indian theatre; Farley, P. Richmond, Darius L. Swan and Philip B. Zarelli edited Indian theatre traditions of performance; Balwant Gargi, Theatre in India; Professor T.K.V. Subramaniam, theatre culture in India, which is in the Aswell material. So all this kind of material can be referred when one is talking about the various kinds of theatre forms which have been there in India, and their importance as well. And we find that apart from the folk theatre, there have been the modern theatre as well, and how the theatre also developed during the colonial period because of the mingling of the Indian as well as the European traditions as well. But before going to that aspect, let us talk about some other folk theatre traditions, where we talk about puppetry, which is one of the most popular traditional media for communication. Word sutradhar, or the string holder, is derived from the theatre. And we find that how it provides education as well as entertainment, and how puppets, they can impart learning on agriculture, health, gender, justice, then removal of superstitions, maintenance of communal harmony, employment, and other issues of relevance. So we find that how puppets, when all of us have seen the way puppetry has been used in Indian theatrical traditions as well, and how puppets, when they are there, and how they are trying to impart some kind of an education on the various relevant kind of topics which are very important from the point of view of the general masses. And we find that for example, in India we have different kinds of puppetry traditions, whether they are the string puppetry, rod puppetry, shadow puppetry. And when we see the colloquial language and familiar situation, they make this art hugely popular with the audience as well. So how not only children, those who are in a way enamored with puppetry, but even adults, they are also in a way fascinated with the various kinds of puppetry traditions which are there in India, and how people, they also in a way relate with the local language in which these kinds of traditions, they are being communicated to the audience. And we see that how Herasim Lebedev, who was a Russian adventurer, and Mr. Golaknath Das, who was translating and staging the two comedies, one was The Disguise and the second was The Love is the Best Doctor. So these were the two ones, and they were being in a way staged on the 7th of November 1795. And thereafter we see that how over next 50 years they witnessed some kind of a surge or upsurge in the establishment of the modern theatre. So how the theatrical traditions, they were being in a way borrowed even in the late 18th century, that is the 1795, and how these were in a way planted in the, or in a way assimilated in the Indian theatrical traditions. And both of them, they created a new kind of a drama or theatre, And this was also as a result of the way English education was introduced in India, and how the establishment of the first Bengali theatre by Prasanna Kumar Tagore in 1831, and how in this a number of plays, they were being English plays, they were being produced by the Indians. And we also see the English translation of Uttar Ramacharita was also staged, and when a new audience came into existence, search for a new theatre was also set in motion. And we also find that similar kind of things, they were happening at Sangi in Maharashtra, and the performance of the Shavatar Yakshagan play was staged. So we find that in various regions of India, especially in the late 18th and the 19th century, some kind of a synthesis was happening at different levels, and not only the earlier traditions, but at the same time some kind of a borrowing from the European traditions in the framework of not only the language, but at the same time how the traditions which were there in these countries, they were also being adapted for the Indian audience as well. And we also find that a playwright, in a way Vishnu Das, in 1843 he prepared a mythological play called Sita Swamvar, and it was this performance which laid the foundation of the Marathi theatre, which grew, and by 1925 it reached the pinnacle of its glory. And how the freedom of the speech for the clown and the makeup of the demons, they show the influence of Yakshagan on it. Then we also find that not only in Maharashtra but also in Bengal, Lebedev theatre had created a desire in the new audience for the suitable plays. And Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and Merchant of Venice, they were also rendered in Bengali at that point of time. And the English models, they provoked nostalgic respect for the best in the tradition. So we find that how the Indians, those who were now in a way learning English language, they were trying to borrow or adapt from the English in English plays as well. And the first play giving expression to the social reform was Kuleen Kul Sarvasa, written in 1854 by Ram Narayan Tarakant, dealing with the problem of polygamy. Then the Parsi Natak Mandali was founded in 1853, and we see also that how the revolt of 1857, it also inspired the Indian theatre in Bengal and Maharashtra, and these were the two regions where the spirit of revolt against the East India Company was more active, and they took a lot of interest during this particular period. Then we also see that how the National Theatre was built in Kolkata in 1872, and Vishnu Das Bhave, he became active in Bombay, and Vinayak Janardhan Kirtane, he wrote many plays on 1857 themes as well. And Deenbandhu Mitra wrote Neel Darpan, and there are indications that a class of dramatists, they were coming into existence, which considered that a play should hold mirror to the social conditions. And between 1857 and 1870, a number of plays they were being written during this time. So we find that how Neel Darpan, which was in a way staged during the colonial period, and it was trying to communicate the plight of the people, those who were engaged in the cultivation of indigo, and it became quite popular, and the background of the colonial exploitation provided a lot of popularity to it, because the people, they could easily relate to such kind of themes. And we find that the professional theatre, Bombay is a commercial center, and Parsi is a commercial community, and professional theatre is a commercial venture as well. So Sangli production encouraged the repeat of the shows to maintain a group of actors and to go to cities like Pune and Bombay to stage plays. So we find that such kind of a developments within India, in whether in Maharashtra or in Bengal or in south of India, they were happening at the same time, and people, they were trying to relate to such kind of theatrical traditions as well. And then we find that how Vishnu Das Bhave, he rented a playhouse in Bombay and collected money, and his first Hindi play Raja Gopi Chand recorded a collection of rupees 1800 in one night, and the promise of the good returns encouraged the commercial ventures. So naturally, when good plays they will be made and audience will come to visit and see these plays, then only they will become successful. And the commercial aspect was realized by the people, those who were investing money in the framework of the making of these plays. So during this time we find that such kind of commercial ventures, they were being in a way encouraged during this time. And because of this, we also find that a number of groups, they also emerged in Maharashtra, and though they did not become theatrical companies in the modern sense of the term, but how with the construction of the playhouses and the assured audiences in the cities, then the situation changed during this time. And we find that how performances, they were being organized on a regular basis, and some of the Parsi companies, they came up into existence by 1850s, and they visited South India as well. Then Karnataka's first professional group in 1877 was formed at a place called Gadag. So we find that these kinds of developments, they were happening at the same time in different regions of India, and the assurance of the audience also provided some kind of an inspiration to the people, those who were engaged in the production of plays or theatre. And when they were being staged on regular basis, and the establishment of the playhouses, all of them, they contributed to the culture of theatre in India. And then we see that some of the sabhas, they emerged in some of the places like Bellary, and how many a times we find that the plays which were produced in South India, they were mythological in nature, and the emergence of the professional theatre could also be seen during this time. So we find that if we tend to understand the theatre during the colonial period, then Neel Darpan by Dinabandhu Mitra was considered, which was, and this play was in a way published in 1860, and thereafter we find that this drama was staged at various times in India, and how the play in a way dramatized the events which were drawn from the upheaval of the 1858, in which Bengali indigo farmers, they were ruthlessly oppressed by the English planters for denying the cultivating indigo. So this kind of an exploitation of the indigo planters or peasants, those who were not ready to in a way cultivate indigo, because of that they will lose the fertility of the soil. But on the other hand, British with all their might, they were ready to crush this kind of a feeling of the cultivators of indigo, that they will not go for the cultivation of indigo. So we find that how play, it stimulated some kind of a substantial public emotion in Bengal against the colonial rule. And in order to fight back the usage of theatre by the Indians, that it may be used as a tool of protest against the colonial rule, the colonial government, it enforced the Dramatic Performance Act in 1876. So the government was very conscious that any kind of a protest in any form will not be accepted by it, and then it came up with this Dramatic Performance Act, so that any kind of a further protest or further expression in the framework of the drama or theatre can be regulated by the government. And it not only did it in the framework of theatre, but later in the framework of cinema as well, when the Indian Cinematograph Act in 1819, and thereafter the boards of the regional censors, they were being established by the colonial government. So this idea of censorship which was there in the colonial minds was in a way to negate any kind of an idea which was associated with the national movement, or which was in a way against the colonial rule. So we find that in the context of the theatre, it is in a way commonly believed that the advent of the Indian films was one of the main reasons for the decline of drama, and how over a period of time the playhouses, they were converted into the cinema houses, and the desertion of the stage actors for the films, and the playwrights, they were being attracted to writing film scripts. They are cited as reasons. So over a period of time, we find that when the cinema arrived in India, and which is from 1912 onwards, with the arrival of Pundalik and thereafter the Raja Harishchandra in 1913. But even then, even before that, we find that a number of films, they were being staged in India, they were being shown in India, exhibited in India, beginning from 1896, when they were being shown for the first time in India. And we find that in the context of the new education, some kind of a new outlook also came up, and many of the Indians, they were also enamored by the English plays, and as they had studied them in their schools and colleges, but they had not studied the Sanskrit plays. So all these kinds of developments, they were also happening at the same time, and we find that a number of translations of Shakespeare's plays, or Kalidas, Bhavbhuti, Harsha and Bhattarayan, all these plays, they were also being translated in the last 2 decades of the 19th century, and we find that a number of social plays, they were also being written. Sangeet Sharda in Marathi, Rabindranath Tagore's plays are also important examples of the urban theatre as well. And we find that how Tagore was trying to evolve the type of drama which was suited to its essential purpose, and his poetical dramas, they recall earlier traditional form of Sanskrit plays, and his symbolic dramas are a protest against what was current then in initiation of Shakespeare's plays. So we find that how playwrights like Tagore also, they were in a way contributing a lot to the Indian theatrical stage scene as well. We also find that when you talk about Tagore, we find that his stage directions were not there about the settings, etc., because the real drama lies in the poetry of writing in the context of Tagore. And his focus was also on the expression of meaning, and he experimented with dance dramas as well. And thereafter we also find that some other traditions, they could also be seen during this time, and the elements of realism were introduced in 1920s by Sisir Kumar Bhaduri, Naresh Mitra, Ahindra Chaudhary and Durga Das Banerjee. And Prabha Devi and Kanakvati were two able actresses of this particular period, those who were trying to dabble in the ideas of realism. And we find that Shishir Kumar Bhaduri dominated the Bengali stage for half a century, and he in a way took the art of acting to the new heights. And we find that he was in a way more significant than anyone else who brought about the transition from the formal rhetorical acting to the modern realistic acting on the Indian stage. Then we also find that during the national movement, during when India was under the British rule, we find that Indian People's Theatres Association, IPTA, it also emerged out of the efforts of the writers and the intellectuals, those who were associated with the progressive writers movement. And in 1930s, as Sajjad Zahir and Mulk Raj Anand, they were the two founder members of the Progressive Writers Association of India, PWA, which called its first meeting of association in November 1935 in London. And thereafter, when Progressive Writers Association was formed in India, in Lucknow, when Munshi Premchand became the first president of the Progressive Writers Association. So we find that even before that, in Paris, they held a conference of the world writers, and it resulted in the establishment of the International Association of Writers for the Defense of Culture against Fascism. So how the progressive forces, those who were against the culture of fascism and Nazism, they were trying to in a way come together and fight with these kinds of tendencies. So we find that Progressive Writers Association was part then of an international movement which focused on the local popular culture with clear social and political objectives. And PWA program, it stated clearly that writer was first socially and politically responsible member of the society. So it in a way was asking him to take cognizance of the Indian situation in particular, and one has to take part in the effort for political and economic emancipation, to take culture to masses, and lastly to develop the regional languages and the literatures. So we find that in 1936 the PWF India, it opened branches in Aligarh, Delhi, Lahore and Allahabad, and an all India meeting of writers was organized in Lucknow in the same year, where Munshi Pirim Chand became the president of the association. And thereafter we also find that how IPTA, the Indian People's Theatres Association, was also formed in Bombay, and the draft resolution of All India People's Theatres Conference, which was drawn up in May 1943, was geared towards anti-fascism and anti-imperialism. And thereafter other developments which we see in the framework of the first bulletin of association entitled Historical Background, published in July 1943, it stated that this theatre movement's agenda was social communication and commitment. So IPTA was basically trying to, in a way, communicate that it wanted to remain within the social communication, and it was committed to such kind of ideals. Then we also see that some kind of a political consciousness which was there among the masses at that point of time, or rather progressive as they were, we find that some kind of a leftist tendency could be seen in 1930s, and the idea of progressivism influenced the literature as well as the drama. So this kind of a progressivism could be seen there. And to imperialism we find were the added words like the dictatorships like Nazism as well as fascism. So when the Second World War began, some of the progressive writers, they were the nationalists in the sense that they were yearning for India's freedom, and they organized IPTA, and it included writers like Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, K. Abbas and Manmat Ray, and it provided the scope and encouragement to the actor producers like Shambhu Mitra. And then we find that there were so many others, those who joined IPTA, and so many of the members of IPTA, how they were closely associated with the film industry as well. And we find that the people, for example, even K. Abbas, how he produced and directed, the film was produced by IPTA, and how a film called Dharti Ki Lal, which was based on the Bengal famine of 1943, it was being made. So IPTA was in a way trying to make some kind of foray into the medium of films as well, because so many members of IPTA, they were associated with the film industry as well. Actors like Balraj Sahani or Shobha Khote, I think, was also associated with IPTA. And we also find that all these actors and the filmmakers, they were trying to communicate the messages which were there in that context, and how IPTA as an organization was also closely associated with the Communist Party. It was seen to be later as the cultural wing of the Communist Party of India. And we also see that how the arrival of the new dramatists and the new actors and the new themes, which were very, very important from the point of view of the development of the theatrical traditions. And under the leadership of Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Indian National Theatre INT came into existence, and this also had some kind of a socialist thought from the left wing of the Indian National Congress, and they were also nationalists in the sense that how they were fighting some kind of war for the independence of India. So we also find that there was some kind of a cooperation with the trade unions and the Kisan Sabhas, the peasant associations. And we have also talked about the folk forms, that how the folk forms, they were also very relevant in terms of transmitting the messages, and how the branches of IPTA, they came up at different places. And then we also see that a number of plays or a number of films which were being in a way produced by IPTA, they were concerned with the ordinary things which were happening in the lives of the people. And on the other hand, when we try to understand the British rule, then they were trying to exploit Indians to the hilt, and how we find that many a times millions of Indians, they starved to death because of the kind of policies which were followed by the British. And British, they always claimed themselves to be superior in nature. They were trying to present themselves as benevolent and the civilized, but such kind of a such kind of actions which were exploitative in nature, where so many Indians they died, how they maltreated the Indians, they in a way always presented them in a very bad light, and I think that to call them even civilized would be some sort of a misnomer. And so in this context, it will be very important to study cinema and theater, both of them, as a medium of cultural communication as well. And we also find that in the recent times how theater has also been used in the classroom teaching, where a number of plays they have also been made on the themes of education, so that the workload of the students, it may not have some kind of a negative impact on them. And we also find that when a theater is being used in the formal space of the classroom, in the discussions and the dialogues, then it is also very easily understandable for the audience or the school children. So, and at the same time, some kind of a diminishing of the social space between the teacher and the student takes place, and it also instills faith in the students and makes the discussion possible as well. So we find that how in a way theater is also playing an important role in that sense, where the abilities and of the students and how the interaction takes place between the teacher and the student, and some kind of a communication which is very good from that point of view. And how street theater or the Nukkad Natak has also been used lately to create awareness on the various contemporary issues of relevance as well. So in this sense, we can say that Indian theatrical traditions, they have made a lot of journey, and the various developments and the traditions, they have also been taken further by the ingredients which have been there in the theater. And definitely they have not only played an important role in terms of entertainment, but at the same time providing education and raising the consciousness of the masses as well. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.